Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our webinar on the Marie Curie Postdoctoral Fellowships. I'd like to welcome you all, and I think we get started right away. As you notice, this meeting will be recorded, and the recording and the slides will be shared with you after the meeting as soon as possible. You will have the possibility to ask questions in the chat or by sending us your questions via mail. Most likely we will not be able to answer the questions directly during the meeting because it will be quite dense. It will, I think, occupy the better half of the next 2 hours. And so what we will do with all these questions is we will regroup them and answer them in writing and send you all an FAQ afterwards along with the document so everybody can profit from all the answers. There's also an FAQ section on the European Commission website that's very useful for some of the questions, but if you have anything that's more personal or only applies to you or you don't want to share with others, you can always just contact us by email and ask us about this. So what are we speaking today about? So this webinar, this training is about the postdoctoral fellowships in the Marie Curie program. They used to be called individual fellowships. Now I think it's a bit more clear who the target audience is, so postdocs. So we will cover several issues. We will start a bit more with the general aspects, what are the fellowships, some specificities about the eligibilities, maybe explaining a bit of the nomenclature that can be a bit specific and might not be straightforward. And then towards the later half, we'll get more into the details, in particular of the template. We will not go into all the details because that will just take too much time. But I'll try to explain a little bit about what the different sections in the template mean, because you might not be used to writing a proposal, you might be used to writing scientific papers and publications, and it is something else. So there are additional elements that you need to cover, while you might need to tone down a bit the scientific side, meaning not the scientific quality, but the detail that you go into. You don't have to mention, for example, every single publication that has ever worked on this thematic, as an example. There are also some slides towards the end that I will not have the time probably to go into. These are about the Green Charter and the supervision guidelines. Now, the Green Charter, this is not a legally binding document, but it's a recommendation that the Commission published with regard to the Marie Curie Fellowships and with regard to the green transition and the Green Deal. It's mostly about how to make your fellowship a bit greener and have less environmental impact. And so you can read a bit in the document, and if there are any links that come to your mind, please mention them in the proposal, because it's certainly a plus. The same goes for the supervision guidelines, especially because I think in the audience there will be two kinds of people. There will be the host institutions today, and there will be the potential applicants. So the supervision guidelines will be important for both of you, but it's important to read through them, and if possible, mention in the proposal that you adhere to these guidelines or how they are being implemented in your institution in particular. So just to start, some vocabulary. The postdoc fellowships, they distinguish between basically two entities, the academic sector and the non-academic sector. Academic sector here is any public, private, higher education, plus research organizations. That's important. So not only universities in that sense, RTOs as well. And the non-academic sector is basically everything else. So that can be companies traditionally, startups, any size, but it can be also associations, foundations, public administrations, cities, you name it. Beneficiaries are, in this case, the host institution. So the beneficiary will be your one main host institution where you will spend the larger part of your fellowship. And that's also the entity that will sign the fellowship, that will have the contract with the European Commission. It's not directly you, the applicant, that has the contract. It's your host institution, the beneficiary. You have one beneficiary in the fellowship. Even if you do exchanges and secondments with other organizations, the beneficiary is the one main entry point. You have associated partners. Now, these are important in the context because these will be basically every institution that's involved in your project, but not your main host, your main site where you work. So that can be exchanges in the form of secondments. It can be short visits, and we'll get to these, what they mean. It can be sites where you receive some additional training, for example. So all of these need to be mentioned in the proposal when you submit it. Then some words about third countries, member states, and associated countries, so TC, MS, AC. Traditionally, in European funding, the only countries that are eligible for direct receiving funding are member states and associated countries. Member states are the member states of the European Union. Associated countries are countries that have have become part of the Horizon Europe program, usually by their government paying a fee to the European Commission. And these are countries that are not member states, like I would say most prominently now the UK, but also Norway, other countries. And not all the countries have undergone yet the signature of becoming an associated country. So countries like Switzerland, for example, traditionally have been associated, and now the legal status is not so clear yet, unfortunately. And there might be other countries that will join as associated countries, which we don't know yet. But this is less of an importance for you right now because you will do your fellowship in Luxembourg. And so Luxembourg is a member state. But third countries are important nowadays because when you do a secondment, so this exchange as part of your fellowship, traditionally you could only do them in member states or associated countries. Now it has changed and you can do these secondments anywhere in the world. So that's quite an interesting change. Supervisor, so the supervisor or supervisors, the main supervisor will be the person at your host institute that is responsible for you. That is most likely the person you will deal the most time with, that will guide you, provide you some feedback, that you will have regular interactions with. Traditionally in an academic setting, that will be a group leader, a professor. At a company, this is different. Generally, these people might not necessarily have all the academic qualifications as would have a professor at a university. That's fine. They have other qualifications and other important things that they can teach you. So just to clarify these roles. So what are the main objectives of the fellowships? Obviously, if you think of a fellowship, you're thinking about your project, you're thinking about the research that you want to do. And that is an important part, obviously. But the Marie Curie program is very much about your career and your career development as a young researcher. So that hence this mobility rule is quite important. We'll get to that, but it basically states you need to come from another country to Luxembourg to do your project. But the main aim is to, throughout this fellowship, you should gain skills and expertise and connections and networks that will make it easier for you in the future to become employed, to receive any kind of employment anywhere in the world. And doesn't have to be academia, it can be industry as well, of course. So these are the main points in the fellowships, and you can read more about the fine points in the slides later on. I will not get through all the fine details of the slides, but you will receive them, as I said. There are two main flavors of Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowships: the European fellowships and the global fellowships. Now, most of you will be in the European fellowships. That's sort of the standard mode. Can be 1 to 2 years in the total length. And you will do this fellowship for the most part here in Luxembourg. There is the global fellowship mode. It works a bit different. It can last longer. It can be up to 3 years. And you have two phases. You have one phase. The first phase is the outgoing phase that can last 1 or 2 years and will be outside of the European Union, in a third country, for example, the US or Canada, China, Japan, whatever. And then after this phase, you will come back to Luxembourg for 12 months. And the idea is you will bring all the skills, everything that you acquired, you will bring back to the research lab and exchange that. What's new is there's also this additional non-academic placement. So besides the secondments, so meaning the collaborations that you can do in the course of your fellowship, there is the possibility towards the end, so after the 2 years, the 2 entire years maximum, you can do up to 6 months additionally in a non-academic placement. And you need to specify this in your proposal. You need to have a letter of commitment of this organization. And it's important, if you did your fellowship, your main host was a company, this additional non-academic placement cannot be the same company or a company that's linked to this company directly. So it needs to be something else. And it needs to make sense in terms of your career development, but also in terms of your project. And this is new, so none of us have a lot of experience with this. So I think this will be a learning experience for all of us. So some just legal rules, you will find all of this in the guide for applicants. I posted the link in the chat room. The individual researcher, you and your supervisor must be 2 different people. The applications must be complete, of course. If you do this, this non-academic placement that I just mentioned before, you need a letter of commitment. But for the secondments, the exchanges throughout the course of your fellowship with either academia or non-academia, you don't need these letters of commitments. Yes, if these conditions are not fulfilled, your proposal might not be eligible. Only 1 proposal per researcher can be submitted. And if there, for whatever reasons, there are multiple proposals that you submit, only the last one that you submitted will be the one that will be evaluated. A supervisor can be involved, so a host institution can be involved in multiple proposals. That's no problem. You can have multiple applicants within your group or within your company. That's no issue. Who's eligible for the European fellowships? Nationalities, any. Great, easy. Mobility, that's an important rule. You can read the fine print, but basically in the last 3 years, you cannot have stayed longer in Luxembourg than 12 months. So, and this is counted from the call deadline. The call deadline is October 12, 2021. So if you came to Luxembourg and started working here or just living here on October 11th, 2020, you will not be eligible. If you came on October 13th, 2020, you will be eligible. You get the idea. But it will be accumulative over the last 3 years, so you can do the calculations. What's new, and that's an important rule, is you can have a maximum of 8 years of scientific experience after your first PhD degree, doctoral degree. There are some exceptions. You can read about them here. We can discuss it in case by case. It doesn't really, there's no sense in going into the details now. It's a very personalized issue. The main message of the Commission is these fellowships are for young, early career researchers. after their PhD. You need to have your PhD at the call deadline. That's important. What does that mean? Having a PhD, you need to have had your defense before October 11th, or October 12th, sorry, 2021. I know some countries, this defense is more just a formality, but the deadline is what counts is this defense. It will be the date that will be on your PhD degree. Even if you only receive your official degree 12 months after your defense, still your defense counts. Okay, so that's important. For the global fellowships, it's a bit different. Therefore, the nationality, you need to be a European or a European member state or associated country national or long-term resident. And there, the mobility is a bit more interesting because because of these 3 years, or let's say the 12-month rule. Since if you already stayed in Luxembourg for longer than these 12 months, and you counted 2 years that you will be abroad in the third country, that can make it more attractive for, let's say, more local people. Secondments versus placements, and also short stays, which we'll get to later. So secondments are basically the name for exchanges of a longer time that are structured and part of your project. So imagine you go to some different research lab where you learn a new technique, you try their infrastructure to make some measurements, something like that. That's a secondment. They can be up to, and that's new, a third of the total duration. So now that means if you do the 24 months fellowship, it can be up to 8 months of the duration. So that's new, that's longer than it was before. It can be in one go. You can take this entire 8 months. You can split them in several parts throughout your proposal, your project. And you can spend them at different places. It doesn't have to be always the same secondment. But what's important is these places where you go to, you need to mention them in your proposal. You need to identify who will be your supervisor there. What is the idea of going there? Why does it help your project? And you always have to think about the science also and your career development, because it might be interesting to have an experience at 20 different hosts, or not hosts, but secondment hosts. But it will be very disruptive for your project because you have to go here and there, etc. So you have to take these things into consideration. Now, what's new is it can be in any country around the world, so that's great. It can be in any sector, so you can, ideally, the Commission always wants cross-sectoral placements, secondments, because if you're in academia, it makes a lot of sense to go to a private, to a company. If you're at a company, it makes a lot of sense to go to an academic partner, but there's no obligation. It's just the idea is you get more experience this way. It's a plus in your proposal. You don't have to do these secondments, but as I said, again, it is a plus. So if it makes sense, you don't have to do it just to do it. If it makes sense, it's a plus. And then you can see the difference to the non-academic placement. That's what I mentioned before. That's the additional 6 months to the 2 years you have towards the end of your proposal. And this should be at a non-academic host. And you see the rules there. Now, what is the difference to short visits? So you need to make the distinction between secondments and short visits. So if you go to a conference somewhere, or if you do a short field study in some country where you need to collect some samples and then come back, that's not a secondment, that's a short visit. There's no exact definition of how long a short visit can be, but it's in the matter of days, not weeks or months, to give you an idea. It always depends on your project, and we can always argue about it. So you go to another place, anywhere in the world, it's outside of the physical premises of your beneficiary, and you are still being supervised by your beneficiary supervisor. So it's not that you go somewhere and then there's a new supervisor at this place. That would rather be a secondment. And as I said, it should be a rather small part. Okay, so the submission part. There's two major parts of your proposal, part A, part B. Part A is more the administrative part. So you fill it out online. It's not the template itself. It's another part that's being filled out online. You can try it out. You can, the calls are now open. You can log in, click on submission and just try filling things out to get a feeling what's needed. Most of the information is rather needed from your host, from the beneficiary, not from you as an applicant. So it can be you as an applicant who fills out all this information. It can be your host that you need to discuss between yourselves. But anyways, you need some information from your host. And at some point, your host needs to do an account on the European Commission participant portal. I put the link somewhere. It's a very easy procedure. It takes 5-10 minutes, but you need to do it. And I recommend also for part A, filling it out in advance. Don't wait for the day before the deadline. First of all, that's generally when the commission servers crash, because there's 11,000 people that will submit their proposal at the same time. That's a lot. And also it gives you just more time if there are questions or things are unclear or whatever. It's IT, so there will always be some issues somewhere that's outside of your control. So rather take your time. Yeah, there are some parts that will be filled out in the part A. One important part will be the acronym of your project. And here I just say acronyms do matter. So when I was in your position some time ago, when I was in research, I had no idea why you need an acronym. An acronym is basically needed to, if the evaluators sit together and they discuss their stack of proposals that they have evaluated, they don't want to remember your entire title that can be very long and complicated. So they want something short and snappy that they can remember and that they can discuss. So do you remember this proposal, XYZ? Oh yeah, I remember, blah, blah, blah. So please don't make it an abbreviation of 5 or 10 consonants that nobody can spell out. That's exactly not making it easier to the reviewers. So even if you have to be creative and it's not exactly fitting whatever your title or exactly what you do, it's much better to have something that can be pronounced than to have like a that nobody can pronounce. Okay. And again, we can discuss it when it comes to that part. Part B is the core part. It's the part that you write, that you will spend most of the time on. Part B1 is the proposal itself. Part B2, that's a different part. I'll get to it in a slide. Part B1 is the 10-page limit. So that's the core part of your proposal with all the most important information. Okay. So part B1, it's restricted to 10 pages, so that will be tough for you. I'm being frank and honest. It's much easier to go way beyond these 10 pages. Generally, what I recommend people is try to split the 10 pages to their 3 main parts, and we'll get to that. Try to split it more or less into these 3 parts when writing. And then even if you start writing and you exceed your respective page limit, you can cut later. That's generally what we recommend. But I know every year there's applicants that at the very last day before the submission, they still have 5 pages too much and they don't know where to cut, and it will be too late, unfortunately. So please pay attention. Don't do any cover pages or table of contents. They will count towards the page limit, so don't add them. It should try to start straight away with the point 1, which is the excellence part. And anything that will go beyond the 10 pages will just be blanked and made invisible. Then part B2, there's no page limit in principle. You have the CV, that's maximum 5 pages. You have in the guide for applicants and the template, you have some recommendations of what should go in there. There's a tendency in general to be much more narrative in your CV and focus less on impact factors, but focus more on your achievements, provide this in a narrative form. In the end, it will come down to your reviewers, of course. You can attach letters of commitment. You fill the ethics part that in many cases it's no issue, but in some cases, especially if you're more in the medical field, it can be quite important to fill it out. There's a part about the participating organizations. So you need to fill out some information there. And you can attach, if it applies, support letters. Generally, this is not mandatory, but in some cases it might make sense. In many cases, it will just be ignored, to be honest. Formatting, also important. Please adhere to the guidelines. They will be listed in the template if you didn't have a look yet. You need to have these margins and you need to have the right font size. You can have tables included, and there the font size is slightly smaller, but please don't try to be very smart and put your entire proposal inside a table so that you can use the smaller font size. We had this many times, and the commission and the reviewers will not be happy, please trust me. So just use tables as for what they should be, for making things clearer, more visible, structuring information. And I highly recommend using tables. Tables and bullet point lists. There's nothing worse, sorry, but I will tell this to many of you once we get your proposals, but there's nothing worse than having these huge blocks of text. Imagine the tired reviewer that has read already 10 proposals and he has this huge block of text and he needs to read through it. It's not very well structured. There's no easy things that jump to your mind. So please make it legible and easy to read. And sometimes you can say something that's in a big paragraph just in a couple of bullet points. So it doesn't have to be a very narrative, nicely. It's not a story that you write. It should be nice to read, don't get me wrong, but if you need to cut to the information, it's better to stick to the core of your information. And there's no need to have all this fancy language and these fancy words. Many of the reviewers will not be native English readers, so don't go look up all the fancy words that you don't know yourself if you're not a native speaker. It's not appreciated, except of course if it makes sense if it's a scientific term that you need to use. Award criteria. Sorry. There's 3 main parts of the proposal in part B1. So there's excellence, impact, and implementation. You can see down there is the score that you will be evaluated on. So traditionally, as a young scientist, you are very much used to writing part 1, part excellence. It's about why are you doing what you're doing, what's the background, which experiments do you do. It's like writing a paper. So please don't forget about part 2 and part 3. They are just as important. They count to, in total, also to 50%. Impact is what kind of impact does your project have? And we'll get into the details, but it's not only impact on science, it's impact on other fields, it's impact on society, impact on economy. There are many things that you might not be used to thinking about that you need to take into consideration here. And we are here to help you. So also along the proposal writing, we are here to help you. So please get in contact. Please send us your drafts and we can give you comments on it. Implementation is more about how do you organize your work. And also, again, I come from academia. I was never taught how to do this properly. So this is really about project management. How do you put your work into different work packages with deliverables and with a timeline, with a Gantt chart, all these things. And we'll get to it in a second. What are some changes? In the excellence part, there are some criteria. If you were used to the previous template, there are some things that shifted around, some elements were fused. You can read about this here. What's new is the gender dimension and the open science dimension are much more important. Gender dimension, I'll get to it, but gender dimension here doesn't mean if you're the gender of your supervisor or your gender. It means if your project has any sort of implications on gender or different implications on different genders. Many times, again, we are not used to thinking about this. Sometimes it's very obvious if it's a biological, medical project. Sometimes it's less obvious, and you might have to think about it. Sometimes there's no relation, and you just say, well, there's no link to gender, the gender dimension. For the impact part, again, some things changed. I like the new template a bit more. I think it's a bit more clearer. There were some elements that could be confused in the previous one. It's still not 100% clear, everything maybe at first sight for you, but again, that's what we are here for. And then, yeah, the impact here is becoming more important, but not only the scientific impact, but also the societal impact. And part 3, there's some rearrangements of the criteria that were moved to here. Again, all these information is just important if you were used to the previous template. Plus, and I've sent you this before, and I'm mentioning it somewhere else. I highly recommend reading this Net for Mobility guidebook, handbook for individual fellowships. Unfortunately, we don't have a new version for this year yet. But if you use the one from last year, it refers to the template from last year. So you need to be a bit more creative and do the effort and take all of the information into consideration. But I still highly recommend reading it. It helps you a lot to tell you what goes where. Okay, the evaluation, how does it evaluate? So there are no major changes. There's external experts, scientific experts that evaluate your proposal. They use these 3 evaluation criteria, and they give you a score out of 5, and then this is being finally translated into a score of 100%. So the threshold is 70%, and so this threshold is for the moment not extremely important. It can be important for resubmissions, so you want to be over this 70%. In reality, the funding threshold is much higher. So unfortunately, so we are not. I mean, we're being honest that you need to have a very good proposal and a very good score. Generally, the cutoff scores are around 90%. So you can imagine it's not trivial to get to this score, and it means that you need to invest a lot of time, and you need to coordinate with your host as well, because if you're missing the information from your host, or if you're the host and you don't take the time to provide to your applicants the information that they need, the chances of success will be lower. And then there will be a ranking list according to the different panels. So there are different thematic panels for the different scientific areas. So generally, this is quite easy to choose. So you will be judged only within your panel. And then what happens? So what's new there is if 2 proposals have the exact same score, then these ex aequo criteria, I think yes, I mentioned it in the next slide. What that means is how does the commission rank 2 proposals which have the same score? And it can happen because, as I said, last call, there were a bit over 10,000 submissions for the Marie Curie. For I don't know how many were financed, but the overall success rate is around 15%. So you get the idea. So around 1,500 basically. I put here the link of the evaluation template. So that's the new document. That's basically an explanation how the proposal is being evaluated. So you can use this to evaluate your own proposal, or you can give it to a colleague or to your supervisor so that they can evaluate your own proposal and give you feedback based on the same criteria that the evaluators will use. So I think that's very useful. There's also a link to the old manual for evaluators. So that's also useful information, even though some information has changed. But that's the document that the evaluators received in the past to explain everything to them, basically. So it can be useful even if it has to be adapted to the new scheme. So what happens if two proposals score the same? First, you look at the excellence criterion. So the one with the higher score in the excellence section will rank higher. If they're still the same, you look at impact. If then it's still the same, you look at the gender balance among fellowships, among the fellows. So if there's in some panels, there's a strong bias towards male or female applicants. So they try to balance this out. If it can still not be, if it's still the same score, then there's further criteria. I think we don't have to get into these details to be honest. In the end, it doesn't really matter for you. You try to do your best. But once you receive your score, we might have to explain you why you received the ranking that you received. The budget, in principle, it will be important for you to know, also for the host to know, but it's nothing you have to worry about. In a normal collaborative European call, you have to write a budget. You need to say who gets how much salary, etc. It's very complicated, somewhat complicated. Here, you basically get a lump sum. You get a fixed amount, and it will be multiplied by the person months. So meaning if your salary, if your project lasts for the maximum, which is 24 months, will be multiplied by these 24 months or longer if you have these additional 6 months of industry placement. So just to explain this a bit. So this money will be paid to the host, to the beneficiary, not to you directly by the Commission. And the beneficiary has a working contract with you and they will pay you your salary. So your salary will basically be the living allowance and the mobility allowance combined. So these two, they're separated because in some countries, the mobility allowance can be taxed differently than the living allowance. But in Luxembourg, I think this is not the case as far as I know. So it will be just combined as your salary. Plus you might receive a family allowance if you're eligible for it. And we'll go into that if it applies. And that will be your salary. But your salary will not be your net salary will not be the amount that you will see here, because this is the amount that your employer gets. Your employer needs to pay some social costs, employer's costs. You will have to pay some taxes and social contributions. So in the end amount that you receive it can be quite difficult for us to tell you right away. In most cases, we don't know it. You basically need to be a tax expert to tell you. I think that the amount that you get is even in let's say an expensive country like Luxembourg, it's still plenty enough to make a living and to live a normal life. But it will be less than what you see here. Just important for you to know. There can be your employer, your host, if they want, they can top up your salary. They can, for example, use some of the money that they receive from the management costs in the right side of the column to give you more money, but they are not obliged to do so. This money is meant for them, so they can use this for whatever reasons they want. But sometimes they might choose to do so because, well, some scientific disciplines are much more competitive than others. So the right side, the institutional contributions, the main point there is the research and training and networking budget. This is €1,000 per month. Doesn't mean that every month you only get to spend €1,000 on all these elements. It's just the total amount that you get, and you spend it however you need it. If you need to buy a laptop at the beginning, this can be covered. If you go to an expensive conference in the middle of your project, that can be covered through it. Etc. So all your expenditures on research, traveling, all these elements they will be covered through this. The last part is the management and indirect contribution. This is given to you as a host. So this goes to the host. It's meant to cover their management costs because they need to spend some time on you. It's meant to pay for your desk and your electricity and all these things that you don't really count directly. And they can use this money for whatever they want. This money is not being audited, so they can really, it's free money that they receive. It's 650 euros per person per month. There's a comment about the country correction coefficient, but in Luxembourg this is 1. Everything is multiplied by 1, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so then this is again a bit explaining more in detail what are the different points. Living allowance, just, yeah, it's your salary. Mobility allowance is meant as an additional salary because you need to move to another country. You need to come to Luxembourg, so you need to find an apartment here, and so this is covering your private expenses. This is not for traveling meant for traveling as part of the project. No. The family allowance, so this is if if people are married or in a relationship with an equivalent status, that's equivalent for Luxembourg, recognized in Luxembourg, or if you have dependent children that you need to take care of, then you will be allowed for this family allowance. And what's new, and this is great, is that if this changes in the course of your project, it will change also. So in the past, it used to be the case that if you get married or if you have a child the day after the call deadline, you will not get this money. If you had it the day before, you will get the money throughout the proposal. Or if you would get a divorce, you will still continue to get the money. Now this is changing for the better or for the worse. But I think it's at least it's fair. Yeah, research, training, networking. This covers basically most of the expenditures. Also visa-related fees, for example, or travel expenses. And yes, that's what I wanted to tell you about here. So you've seen, so the call is now finally opened, and you can even start submissions and look at the system, how to submit, so that's great. The call deadline, the submission deadline is the 12th of October. Initially it used to be, I think, the 15th of September, so they pushed it backwards for reasons I don't want to get into. Here's the total amount of the total budget for this year's call. And then you can see next year there will be another call, so it's 1 call per year. So this is in particular for the host institutions that are mentioning this. This can be something that we can continue to do and help you with in the future as well. But we always start around looking for candidates already late in this year, so because it takes time to find a good candidate. So that's more for the hosts rather than the applicants. I don't go into the ERA fellowships because Luxembourg is not eligible for them anymore. This was what used to be called the widening fellowships in the past, and we are not eligible for it anymore. So this is about what the submission looks like. Just if you want to find the templates, and you will find the PDF template, but if you want to have the editable Word template, you need to follow this procedure. So you go to the call website, you click on Start Submission. Don't worry, it sounds scary, but you can just click on it. Nothing terrible happens. You need to select if you do the European Fellowship or the Global Fellowship. And then they ask you to create an account, which can be done very fast. So you as an applicant can do the account, and your host at some point will do the account as well. And then you get to this page that you see down on the right side. And there is a part that's called Download Part B Templates. So that's the part where you need to where you can download your template and the Word document. The Part A you will fill out online on this website. you see it starts with find your organization. So there it starts with this pick. This pick number is a number that your host needs to have. So there's one pick number per host. If, for example, you're at a university or a big research institute, they will have a pick number. If you're at a company, they might not have a pick number yet. So they need to start this process at some point. As I said, it's very fast, but they just need to do it. They just need to log in, create an account. They will get this pick number. They enter their address and their name, and that's almost all of it already. What I wrote here, submit early and often. So what's a nice trick is if you're getting closer towards the deadline and you start getting more serious in your drafts, you can start uploading and submitting it. So I know that sounds very scary, but what it means is you basically have an online backup. So imagine you are very close to the deadline, you have just a few more grammatical errors to correct, but you don't upload your proposal, and then something the day of the proposal goes wrong, the day of the deadline goes wrong, your computer crashes, or the servers of the European Commission freeze, or whatever. You don't have an online backup. If you submit it the day before or 5 hours before, it will be already on their servers. So even if they don't have the version 3.9, they will have the version 3.8, and that might be good enough. And if there's no problem, you will just upload the new version, and your old version will be replaced. So it's not like you do 20 submissions. You will just replace your proposal, and it will always be replaced with the latest version. So that's just a tip that we give. So here's the timeline. I think what's most important for you is the deadline. So 12th of October. No argument about that. I don't think it will be postponed again. So that's the amount, that's the date. And please submit before the 12th, because as I said, everybody will submit on the 12th, and it will be very difficult. There will be IT issues, etc. So you will receive the notification. So there will be roughly 5 months of evaluation before you receive the results. So that would be February 2022. And then there is some more time of negotiation, so the grant agreement. Often that can be quite fast for the individual fellowships. So generally the earliest you can start working under the fellowship, so you can start working earlier, but you won't be paid through the European Fellowship, and it will not work retroactively. But the official date is around May 2022. It will, as I said, depend on this grant agreement signature. However, you do have the option of delaying that start. You don't have to start then right away. If I remember correctly, I might be wrong, but in the past it used to be that you could delay it even up to 1 year or so after the call deadline, which would be October 2021, for various reasons. If we had, for the COVID, for example, last year, there were many people that delayed the onset of their projects. Can be other reasons, of course. Okay, what are the next steps? Well, you look for the host institution, but that's generally what happened already. That's why we contacted you. I believe that most of you, the applicants, have received an okay by your respective hosts, and I believe all the hosts, or I hope so, by now have done the interviews with their applicants and have told them yes or no, because well, it's only fair to them to get an answer as soon as possible. Don't forget thinking about secondments and your career development, and start writing the proposal. Okay, so now we move a bit more into the serious part. So the grant, well, first of all, the support that you can get and the grant writing. So what can you do yourself to prepare yourself and to get into it? I posted already some links in the chat, but here are again clickable links that you can click on in the PDF that you'll receive. The two most important documents are the guide for applicants and the proposal template. For the proposal template, it's not very detailed. So what I suggest is we prepared a more detailed template where we helped you structure it even more. So we every mandatory point and bullet point that's in the official template, we added additional subsections and subpoints. You don't have to use this. There's no obligation to use this. There's no obligation to use the official structure, the official templates, but you can add more points. And I highly recommend it. It helps you to structure it better. It helps us to be able to give you better feedback, because we'll see, okay, this point is missing, this point is missing, and we don't have to read 5 pages in order to see, oh, there he wrote about it, or she. And it will help the reviewers find the information that they're looking for and that they're evaluating. So that's very valuable. So I highly recommend using this more detailed template that we'll share with you afterwards. It will make everybody's life easier. Okay, so then I recommend using this NCP handbook that I mentioned before. This is made by this Net for Mobility, a great NCP network. That's a network of people like me in different countries that work together, and other people have created this handbook, which is extremely useful. As I said, please read it. Please think that this applies to the previous template. So there are additional points. There are points that are structured a bit differently, but I'm sure all of you are very smart and can figure it out. It's still an extremely useful document. And then you can use this self-evaluation document. You can use it yourself. You can give it to your supervisor, to your peers, to whatever, people that can give you feedback, constructive feedback. How do you prepare yourself, and how do you interact? What is the information you need from your host? That's important, because you shouldn't wait with this till the very end. You need some administrative information that will be mostly in the part A. These are general things like what's the name of the company, what do they do, etc. They need this PIC account. In the PIC here, it's a clickable link for the host, so you can click on this and it explains how you can create your PIC, and you start the process, and it's very easy, and you can give this number to your applicants. And you only need to fill it, if you have multiple applicants, you only need to fill it out once forever, basically, except if you want to update it. You need to have some information about your supervisor, so what is his or her background and experience, how will you be integrated in the structure, into the team, how will you be informed about what's going on, how are people looking after you, what are the support services that you receive, etc. All of this is specified much more in detail in the template. One thing that's extremely important anywhere in the proposal: be concrete. I cannot stress this enough. Be concrete. Don't write generic things like, oh yeah, sometime I will do this training. No, please say which training, where, when, as much information as you have. Sometimes you don't have all the information, that's fine. But be as precise as possible, because everybody can just claim something generic, like, oh, we'll do some communication activities about the results. That doesn't mean anything. So you really need to be very concrete here. Don't forget about your trainings, that's very important. And think about how you complement your host. That's also important. What is skills, expertise that you bring to your host that they don't have? That's very important. If you can show this clearly, that's a big plus. And vice versa. What is the experience, the whatever infrastructure that they have that you don't have? You should complement each other. And I put here again the link to the guide for supervision. Now, about us, how can we help you? We are the NCPs, the national contact points for Luxembourg. So we help support proposals that are happening at the Luxembourgish host. That's important. Maybe some of you, for whatever reasons, ended up in this training and want to contact us to either go from Luxembourg to another country or just do your project at another country entirely. Please contact your local NCPs. We are not responsible for this situation. every NCP for every country is responsible for the proposals or projects that are being done in their respective countries. And if you have questions, contact me. I can show you where you can find the NCPs of the other countries. So we try to help you with any questions that's related to the project, technical, legal, budget, eligibility, the content of your proposal. And we do, I think that's the biggest service that we do and the most important, we do these reviews of your proposals. If you want it, there's no obligation. And if we can, there's also no obligation on our side. Because depending on how many proposals we get, especially if we get them very late, we might not be able to give you a lot of feedback. But if you give us early drafts and you give us your drafts on several occasions, we can try and improve it constantly and work on some issues and really help you improve the proposal. Because if you only give it to us at the very end, first of all, we don't have the time to read it in much detail. And second of all, there's no way for you to incorporate all the comments that we do. So there's it doesn't make sense for us to give you a lot of comments if you don't have the time to really make a change in the proposal. We cannot guarantee feedback in time. In the last years, there has never been an issue, except again for the people that contact us 2 days before the deadline. Also, summer is holiday season for you, for your hosts, and for us as well. So I'll be on holidays. I labeled it here. Sorry, but I cannot give you any feedback around that time. There's the possibility that some colleagues inside the team can help you with very crucial, very important things during that time, but they will not be able to give you a lot of in-depth feedback. So please take that into account. And please read this handbook, read all the information that we are giving to you, because honestly, for over 50% of the proposals we received last year, the first comment that we say is, please have a look at this handbook. Please follow the structure of the template that we gave you, because it's just too much work that you do, that you need to do to adapt then again and change. So please don't just try and invent your own template or structure, but adhere to as much as possible to to the recommendations and the guidelines. So as I said, there's no obligation for us to be involved in the structure. In 2019, the proposals that we reviewed were twice as likely to being funded as the ones that we didn't review in Luxembourg. Last year, our success was not so great. I don't know the reasons, but I do believe that we have an added value. And honestly, even if you wouldn't make it, if you're not being selected for funding, I think it's an extremely valuable experience to do this writing and also try to improve your proposal, not just, put it on the paper and be done with it, but try to do the best that you can, because it will help you in any career that you do. Trust me, even if you go outside of academia, being able to plan a project and structure a project is important in almost any fields that you will work in. There are other services possible. There are, for example, consultancy companies that are specialized in Marie Curie programs. If you need, I can recommend. I can send you some names. It's generally never exhaustive because I don't know everything. I cannot tell you work with this one or work with that one, because that's something that we legally cannot do. But we can recommend some that we have good experience with. Some, they work very differently. Some are very general and more like an industry, and they will, send you lots of documents and make you listen to an online course, and you pay a lot of money for it. But some of them are very personalized, and they will sit down with you and have, well, nowadays remote chats and help you discuss and improve your proposal. But so again, this will cost money. Some hosts offer this, they have budget for this. Some hosts don't. That's completely up to them. It's not mandatory. There are many good proposals that make it without. But generally these things do improve the proposals, especially if you as a host don't have a lot of experience in writing these proposals. There's only so much that we can do, and a consultancy company can go into more details. And they have different models. There are some cost a lot of money, others are more cheaper, but don't expect any last minute wonders, especially the ones that work very personalized. They like to be informed way in advance, just like us, to be able to really make a difference. So it's something to think about, and we can discuss it. I just put it out there that you know these things exist, and then you do with it what you want. Okay, so second. Now to the grant writing. I think that's the interesting, the relevant part. First, some basics. So, well, try to be clear. I cannot stress this enough. That's a comment that I will put very often in very many different places in your proposal, maybe, but try to be clear. Sometimes the ideas are very clear to you in your mind because you thought about it many times and you're the expert in what you do, but it might not be very clear to the reader. So try to spell everything out. Try to make it short and clear and easy to understand. That's much better than using very fancy language and using complicated words and using filler words, you know, these words that we all use when writing, but they don't mean anything. They don't add any new information. So it will be hard to stick to the 10 pages. So please just stick to the information and not anything that's superfluous or superficial for that matter. So go straight to the point and address the big question. Always start at the very start. What is the big question that you want to answer with your project? That's very important, and you can refer to it several times throughout the proposal. I write here, do not repeat. Yes, that's true, but some things you can and you should repeat. And one of the things is the big question: why are you doing this project? Don't try to hide any weak points because the reviewers generally are not stupid. So they will go right to the weak points of your proposal. So if your supervisors, your peers, us tell you, please look at this, this is a weak point, then please try to address it and don't try to hide it. Yeah, just make it nice to read your proposal. You can use nice paragraphs, short paragraphs, use bold, use colors, use graphics. Don't overdo it, of course. But use it as much as possible, and trust me, it's much nicer for a reviewer to read a proposal that's only 9.5 pages than to read one that's 10 pages and every single small space is being used and there are no paragraphs and no graphs and nothing. That's a nightmare. So the 10 pages are there for a reason. You do have to answer a lot of things, but it will be a big exercise in being concise and being focusing on the essential information. Yeah, please respect the numbering of the template. Don't just invent new things. That's, I think, pretty obvious. For part A, if we speak about the abstract, so the abstract will be in part A. Generally, you write this at the very end, not at the very beginning. And the abstract is extremely important, trust me. It's not to be taken lightly. So this is the information that should go in there. It's why do you do this project? What is the big problem, the big question? Is it a EU priority or a global priority, a societal priority? Does it somehow influence EU competitiveness, the economy, society, citizens? Why do you do it now, and why do you do it? Are you the best person to do it? And all of these things, and the abstract is very short, so you need to be just one sentence. Why you? Use the keywords and the phrases wisely. Avoid, don't give any background or in-depth background on literature or anything in the abstract, or abbreviations that you don't explain. Try not to write passively, and then really try to bring all the important elements of the Marie Curie in the abstract already. So not only the research, but also the training, also the impact, also communications and activities that you do, etc. Okay, so now we move to part B1. So as I said, part B1 is the 10-page part. That's the most important part of the document, of the proposal, sorry. As I said, it can be a good idea to, because there are 3 parts in part B1. So part B1-1, part B1-2, part B1-3. Excellence, impact and implementation. It can be a good exercise if you now structure when you should do what. It can be a good exercise to say and to discuss with your supervisor, okay, I want to give you a first draft of the excellence part by day X, and then in the meantime, when they are looking and reading your part 1, you can start be writing on part 2, the impact, for example. But it really depends on you, and it also depends on your supervisor what you want. You can do it whatever way you like. It's just an idea, because generally for me, I like, if I send a document to somebody, in the meantime, I don't want to waste the time. I want to continue working on the document. And imagine you are already changing things that the other guy is commenting on, then this will be not very useful. That's just one idea to deal with that. So the elements I'm putting here in the next slides, these are just copy pasted from the template. So the official template, so these are the elements that need to be covered. I'm highlighting here a few things that I believe are very important. I won't go into all the details, but I think it's important for you to understand what is meant by these different sections. Again, I think with the timing, we don't have the time to go into the huge depth of all these elements. So I don't try to do that, but I try to give you still a good idea of what's meant here. And you will see in the template, the more detailed template that we'll send you, we give you better structures so that you don't forget to cover any of these points. So 1.1 is the project, research and innovation objectives. So this is really, what is your project about? Why is it original and innovative? And what have other people done? And importantly, how do you go beyond that? So state of the art, that's what have other people done, the background, the literature, and you have to show how you go specifically beyond these points. So not just say, well, somebody found this and we'll do it better, but try to be as specific as possible. You see here, this is new. They really say it should be measurable, verifiable, achievable. So measurable means, can you measure how, if you say, well, we'll do it better, well, can you measure, can somebody measure how much better you did it? And can somebody verify that if you claim it, if it's true? And then what you're claiming, is it even realistic? Is it achievable? And why is it achievable? At the same time, and this is always a balance, I agree, it should be achievable and yet it should be ambitious. So there's no golden formula for this. You should do something that's non-obvious. It's not just, doing something that 20 other people have done already. You should do something that has a certain risk of failing, as do all RDI projects. But you should do your best to have at least most of the things achievable. So the commission, in the end, they will not care. Let's imagine you get your funding, you do your project, and you don't get the results that you wanted for whatever reasons. I mean, this is science after all. It doesn't mean that the commission will not pay you the fellowship or something like that. They will pay for the work that you do. So you need to do the work. Let's imagine you after 6 months you stop showing up and don't do anything anymore, sure, the Commission will not continue paying your fellowship. But if you do the work and it fails, that's okay. But still, you should do your best of making a project that's achievable, at least. 1.2, so that's the methods part. Also very important. It will be tricky. There's no golden rule. All disciplines are a bit different here. Some people have the tendency to go into a lot of detail. You don't have to go into every detail here. You don't have to say whatever, how the formulas of each chemical that you use or whatever, when you add X to a tube Y on day Z. That's not the point. But people should get, and reviewers should get, an idea of what approach do you use? What are the concepts behind this approach? Why are you using this approach? Have other people used this approach and failed? And why have they failed? How will you not fail if you use this approach? Are there any challenges? And generally there are to any methodology. Generally it's not, especially if you do an ambitious project, there are challenges. Sometimes things fail. But you need to show what happens if they fail. What precautions have you taken? Why don't you believe that they would fail? Why are they the best methods? I think that's really the point you want to make. It's also important here to think about different disciplines. So how do you also include methods and disciplines that are probably maybe outside of your main area of work, from other fields? I know science becomes more and more interdisciplinary, and we are not used to thinking in these boxes anymore. But the Commission really wants to show you why and how you're using this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach, or why not? Maybe it's not relevant here, but then, and this is new, you should provide a justification. Why is it not relevant? Gender dimension. So that's something that's getting a bit more traction or more importance now. Please note this refers to the project. This doesn't refer, again, to your team or to your gender or whatever. This really refers to, does your project have any consequences on a dimension? And it can be very broad. You might, I don't know, you might develop a code, an application, and there might be some studies that show that, I don't know, women are much more or less used to using such solutions. Or how do you take this into account? Just an example. Sometimes it's very obvious, sometimes it's less obvious. Don't write anything out of the thin air just to have something here. If there's no gender dimension, that's fine, just mention it. But you need to mention it. And there are plenty of documents on giving you a bit of an idea. Maybe you're not used to thinking about these things. And I put the link there on the page. And it's also in the guide for applicants. Open science, this is also another thing that's getting much more important. And the Commission, for this open science part and the research data part, the two elements on this side, on this page, the Commission recommends up to half a page, which is not negligible. You can use more or less, it depends on your project, obviously. But you need to think about these things. It's not just something you say, oh yeah, we also do open science and that's it. So what open science practices do you use? Why do you use them? Why do you use those and not others? How do they help advance your project? And if they're not appropriate, please mention it too. If you're not familiar with the open science concept, that's fine, don't panic. I put some links at the end, or you just use Google and look for open science practices. It's fairly obvious, but it will be important. Research data management is also extremely important, and I know this from personal experience. So when you're in research in many fields, you generate a lot of data, and some part of it will end up in publications, and that's fine. This is being dealt with. But some part of this data management will just stay there. And so the Commission wants to have this information not being lost. We don't want to pay for projects that in the end don't, you know, where this information is just lost and wasted, and somebody else needs to make it again. So this is why we have this FAIR principle, this findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. Again, there are many good guidelines on this that you can look for, how to do this best, but this is something that you need to take into account. Sometimes this will be for IPR reasons. You cannot make this publicly available, and that's fine. So, but you need to address it then. Okay, 1.3, supervision training. Very important. It might be something that you have the tendency of ignoring a bit at the beginning, but trust me, it's very important, and many people lose points on this part. So the supervision part, this is first of all about your supervisor. So what are the qualifications of your supervisor? What is his or her experience? And it doesn't need to be academic. They can have experience in other fields or other qualifications. That's fine. Of course, if they have been doing supervision, and especially if they've been doing it at a high academic level, you should mention it. But it should be clear that your supervisor is not just there on paper, but that they will be there to help you in your project, and how that will happen. Training, extremely important. So this is training on science, but also training on outside of science, transferable skills, project management, interpersonal skills, conflict management, writing, grant writing, many transferable skills that are extremely important, and that often enough people in academia don't have a chance to learn about before they need it. So that's why the Commission is putting so much effort on this. So you don't have to get these trainings inside of your host. It's perfectly fine to attend trainings nowadays. Most of them are remotely anyway, so that's perfect. You don't lose so much time, and it's cheaper. But please make good use, and please mention them, and please again be concise and concrete. Tell them when you want to do what kind of training. Even you might not know the exact date, you might not know the exact name of the training, but please mention, okay, if the first year of your work will be very data intensive and you lack some sort of data analytics skills, please make sure that you know which trainings you want to get where and when at that time where you need the skills, right? So that's important. And then this two-way transfer of knowledge. Sometimes people misunderstand this a bit. This is what I mentioned a bit before. You will have knowledge that your host doesn't have, knowledge, skills, network. It's not only knowledge, traditional knowledge, and your host will have the same that you don't have. So what kind of knowledge is that? You need to specify it. And how, and that's important, how do you guarantee the transfer? So, and again, you need to be concrete. You cannot say, well, I'm very good in, I don't know, technology X, while my host isn't, so I will teach them about it. Okay, that's fine. How will you teach them about it? Who will you teach it to? How will you teach it to them? How long and when? These kind of things. It can be very short, again, but it should be precise and concrete, because anybody can claim anything. But if it's more concrete, people will have much more of a tendency to trust you and believe you. Okay, and then if you do this non-academic placement, you mentioned it also in this section, why you do that. What I didn't mention is, if you have these secondments, so you collaborations with other partnering institutions. Supervisors also refers to them, so you also need to have a small paragraph here on who will be your supervisor at the secondment host. So imagine you are at a company and you will do an exchange with a research organization in Luxembourg. Who will be your supervisor there? What will be their qualifications, etc. So also address all these points for them. Then this is slightly newly formulated 1.4, your professional experience, competences, and skills. So why do you believe you have all the skills that are necessary to do this project? This doesn't necessarily refer to your future career, because you might, in your future career, you might want to get new skills, require new skills that you acquire to this project. But for the project that you want to start, what are the qualifications you have? What can you show for yourself and claim for yourself that you are the right person to do this? Then we move to part 2, so the impact part. As I said, it counts for 30% of the total score, so very important. This is more towards what I mentioned just before. What are the trainings and the measures that you take during the proposal to make your career better, to make you more employable, to make you more interesting, to work in different environments in the future? So that's skill development, it's career development, it's trainings. Of course, try to avoid mentioning the same things at 2 different places. So sometimes you need to make a choice, and we can discuss this more in detail, what should go where. But these are the main points for 2.1. 2.2, so this is also very important. Well, all of these points are very important, so I will repeat myself, sorry for that. Dissemination, exploitation, communication. These are 3 different things. Can be hard to distinguish in the beginning. In the guide for applicants, and especially in the NCP handbook, they give you much more information on the differences, so please have a look at that. Dissemination, just briefly, dissemination is about professional communication, I should say, or discussion, exchange with professionals, people from your area, professionals from your area. How do you convey the findings, the outcomes, the impact of your project to them? Often that is scientific publications, but it can be conferences, it can be policy briefs, it can be various things. And there are more examples in these documents that I mentioned. Exploitation is how do you guarantee that whatever you generate will that people will do the best out of this, and even beyond your project. So it might be leading to a spin-off company, it might lead to some patenting, it might lead to further research. All of these things are exploitation, and they should be considered. Communication is about informing non-professional audience. So that can be the general public, it can be students, it can be school children, it can be citizens, it can be policymakers. Policymakers, it can be a mix if it goes to dissemination or communication, it depends a bit. But that depends on the degree and the content of what you will mention. So you should have some sort of strategy for the IP, for any IP that might be generated. So then that's also a new part. What's the impact on science, on society, and on economy? So science, that's generally easy to answer, but you need to think a bit outside of the box. So think about different disciplines, think about new disciplines that might arise in the future, new instruments that will be created, etc. Economy, you might not be used to thinking about this so much. Also try to be realistic here. I mean, if there's a very remote chance that in 100 years further development will lead to something then it's probably not worth mentioning it here. But for all the rest, if it has a direct and a concrete and a strong impact on the economy and technology development, please mention it. Society is a bit less tangible and broad. It can be very many different things, but I'm sure you will find some way how your project will affect society. Because in the end, it's society, it's the citizens that will pay for your project, that pay for the European funding. And in the end, you want to show that you give them something back. Part 3, implementation. So implementation is about how your project will be structured and managed. And for me personally, when I was a postdoc, this was a skill I never officially learned. I just had to teach it myself. And only after learning about it in my later life, I realized how useful and how important it is to be able to structure your work well, to manage your work well, to have these checkpoints in your work to be able to decide, does it really make sense to proceed in that direction or not? Sometimes if you had a good supervisor in the past, it wasn't so important, but sometimes you're very independent already, and then this is a skill that you need to have. So here you need to give an overview about your work plan, and if you have no idea about these concepts of work plan and work packages, there's plenty of good literature around to look it up. You don't need to buy many books. These are things that you the basic concepts that you can learn quite easily, just online. But it's really about how do you structure how do you divide your work into different packages to be able to manage it. And so you shouldn't have too many packages there. So generally we recommend having around 6 or so work packages, and only 2 to 3, maybe 4 of them should be scientific work packages. So one might be, I don't know, getting all the literature and doing a research about what other people have done. One package might be developing your first prototype, and one package might be testing your prototype. This is a very linear thing that I'm saying here. It might be very different. It might be 2 things that lead to one, or whatever, any sort of structure. And then the other ones are more about the management of your project, and they are important because they show that you had a good, strong hold on managing your project. So one work package should be management, one work package should be training, one work package should be communication, etc., dissemination, exploitation activities. So all of these things are important, and the work plan helps you organize them chronologically, meaning that you can see, okay, in the first 6 months, I have to do all these things together, all these different work packages together, so that's not feasible. So you need to divide it somewhat logically that it becomes manageable. So you give information about the timing and the content of the different work packages. What are the different tasks? So each work package you will divide in different tasks. So task 1 might be, I don't know, I do the literature research. Task 2 might be I write up a short summary, etc., whatever. Then very important, the risk assessment, and that's something that you cannot forget. So what are the risks you identify for your research and/or for administrative purposes that would delay your project, that would make it impossible to receive some results, and what you do about them? And often people struggle with this because they don't really know what to write, so they write either something that's completely unrealistic, or they write something that's too obvious. So it's difficult to strike a balance there. There's no golden rule again, but we can discuss it on a personal level. But generally, it will be things. Let's imagine I don't know, you need to develop a new method, and the method doesn't work, right? It can be possible. So you have to use an alternative method. That's then your mitigation, a method that has been proven, that might be less good, but that works. So that's your mitigation. Well, nowadays you can say, well, the risk is that your onset of your project might be delayed because of another a global lockdown. You know, it's not unrealistic at all. So that might be something. Maybe that one's a bit too obvious, but still, just to give you some ideas. Then please include a Gantt chart here. If you don't know what a Gantt chart is, please look it up. They ask this, and don't make it an entire A4 page, because you will lose that space also. So try to make it concise, but also at the same time try to have as much information as makes sense for your project. So the Gantt chart is basically a visual representation of the different work packages, so that you can see when you do what, basically. And include deliverables and milestones, and your secondments and all these things. Deliverables and milestones, I give a bit more detail in this extended template that you'll receive. So please try to read about it and try to get an understanding what a deliverable and a milestone is and what the differences are, because I agree it's not always very clear, especially if you don't come from this project management type of situation. Quality and capacity of the host institutions and also the participating organizations. So that includes how you will be integrated in the team, in the institution, what support they can offer to you, what's their capacity and their quality in general, especially if they're a small structure. And this might not be more important to highlight because people will not know it. And if you imagine a small startup, a reviewer might not necessarily believe that you have the capacity to do the work that you're doing. So you need to say why you do have the capacity. Okay, so we're almost getting towards the end. CV, I think you have a small template with the basic information in the guide for applicants, or the template, I forgot. There's a 5-page limit. Obviously, try to leave a good impression. Don't try to hide anything. If there are gaps in your career, that's fine. Just speak about them. That's generally, people have a good understanding once you address it. And it's also important, especially if it's being counted towards your 8-year expertise limit. Then people will also obviously look at your CV to cross-check. Yeah, list any sort of achievements that you had. Again, as I said, there's more tendency to move away from impact factors and age scores and whatever scores you have, towards more of a narrative. The idea being of the commission is, imagine 2 different researchers coming from 2 different backgrounds, one from a university that's underfunded, that has a very limited amount of budget, low amount of infrastructure, but they have this brilliant young researcher that is you. And imagine another, a second applicant that comes from a highly prestigious university. They have all the machines and all the equipment that they want, and a very famous professor that has many publications. At first sight, they might be judged differently, even though they might have the same capacity and competences and potential. So how do you judge that potential? That's very difficult, but at least the commission is trying to push reviewers to look beyond this, and also to judge you based on your experience. So if you if you have just received your PhD degree yesterday, you might have a different experience level than if you received it 7 years ago. That's super obvious. So the Commission asks the reviewers to take this into account. Now the reviewers, they can do whatever they want, but that's at least the general recommendations that they give. Some general tips. I mentioned this before in some form or another, but here it goes again. You need to justify your claims. So if you say a point, if you make a claim, you need to somehow justify it, back it up somehow, either by referencing to literature or to preliminary results that you had, which are not mandatory, by the way. But try to back up your claims and just don't say, well, this will work. I'm the first one who has ever tried this, but it will work. I know it. Nobody will believe you necessarily. Try and use and repeat some of these keywords so that your career and the development of your career is very important. Leadership skills, it's the same. It's important for your career development. How do you gain more independence? And what are the skills that you need for this, and how do you acquire these skills? A leadership skill is not something you just, most people don't just learn it by doing it. That's often, well, you got to be very lucky to have a good leader who just got to be a good leader because he naturally had the skills. But you need, oftentimes you need a good mentor, and the mentor can be outside of can be different from your supervisor. And there are very good leadership courses nowadays that teach you a lot of very good things. So I highly recommend that. The highlight is mutually beneficial relationship between you and your host. And nowadays the citizens become much more relevant as well. So try to show how you engage citizens or how your solutions are important for citizens. Maybe have some workshops, some open doors with citizens, or an exchange. This can be two ways. How can citizens give feedback to what you do? I know this is a double-edged sword, and there needs to be limits and on how this should work in reality, but I think it's an important point, and it's getting more and more important. And then try to see about and mention relevant EU policies and documents and strategies and initiatives. I agree you might not be familiar with this, and maybe your supervisors might not be familiar with this, but most of the time I'm also not familiar with this, and I work a lot with the European Commission, but I don't know about all these things in all the different disciplines. But oftentimes when I just Google whatever, say whatever your greenhouse effect, greenhouse gases, plus EU, plus policy, plus document, something like that, I type it into Google and I will find 5 million results, and generally the first 5 or so will be relevant. So you have a look at that, and if they're really relevant, you can just mention them. Mention that you're aware of them. If there's a strong link, or if you're aligned with them, even better. It's a great argument for to make that what you're doing has been identified as an EU priority by somebody else. It makes it much more believable and much more relevant. Well, be nice to the evaluators, should be fairly obvious, but what I mean is try to structure your information in a way that makes it easy to read, easy to get the most important information. Like if you write a paragraph, try to have the last sentence in a paragraph summing up your idea that you wanted to make in that paragraph, or transition it, make it a short transition to the next paragraph. If it's 2 different ideas, link them somehow. Often I see, because people have just copy pasted different sections from different parts, it reads like there's no logical flow at all. And that hurts, the attention, and it's very tiring to read many proposals like this. So try to have this flow. I know it's very difficult, but try to do your best and have this summarizing sentences sometimes that maybe you can highlight somehow, because often even reviewers will not read every single detail of your proposal. So they might just read the last sentence of your paragraph. And if it's summing up what you just wrote in the paragraph, they will first of all get the information, and second of all might dig deeper into the paragraph and say, oh, this is actually interesting, this is a good point. Yeah, follow the formatting, of course. If you want some inspiration, I know some people ask this every now and then, if we can share some successful proposals with them. We cannot, but the internet can. So this is a relatively quick search that I did for, I suppose, successful proposals that were uploaded, Marie Curie proposals from the past that were uploaded on the internet. Check them out. I cannot guarantee that they were successful indeed. I also don't recommend just copy pasting the approach that they had, because it might not be suited to your approach, but it will give you an idea of how they look like, and it will give you a feeling that they can look very differently. Here are some useful links for the guide for applicants, the work program, the templates. The REA is the Research Executive Agency. That's the agency from the European Commission that's managing the Marie Curie calls. So there are some interesting documents on their website. That's it for me from most part. Thank you very much for your attention. I have, after this slide, I have more bonus material. You will see that when you download it. So this is the guidelines for supervision and the guidelines for the Green Charter. I don't want to go into this. I know it's very tiring to listen to this and still pay attention. Sorry for that. I hope with getting the slides and getting the recording, you get a better chance to review all the information. Have a look at these documents. They are important. They are not mandatory, but all these things are little steps that can make your proposal slightly more competitive, and that's in the end where you want to go. And if you can say, well, I adhere to the Green Charter because I use, I don't know, the more environmental friendly transportation methods to go to this conference, or I attend the conference only digitally, or whatever, things like this. They can be very small plus, and lots of very small pluses make a big plus. And since, imagine having 11,000 proposals being ranked, there will be proposals that are very close to each other. So you want to give yourself the best edge that you can get. So again, thank you very much. Please, again, post your questions in the chat or send them by email. I think the best is, for everybody's sake, if we don't get into the questions now, but rather, as I said, send them to you as an FAQ document summarizing all the information so that all of you share the knowledge. And then please get in touch with us so that we can arrange maybe meetings if you need to. Maybe something isn't clear, but I do recommend to have a look at all these informations that I send you, because it's also a waste of our time to have to explain everything once again. If you have the information written somewhere already, but you just didn't have the time to read it, please read the information, take the time to digest it, and any questions that remain, we are there to help you. And then also to get in touch to see when you need which kind of help. For example, if you want us to set up together a timeline for yourself, we can see if we can help you. Generally, it's better if you do this together with your host, because, well, they will know and you will know what's the best working mode. You know what your obligations are. But I cannot stress this enough. Please start early, because it's a lot of work. Even if the deadline is in October, you need to start as early as possible. because all of this small fine-tuning in the end, it will take a lot of time, much more time than you expect. And there are always things that you didn't imagine having to deal with. So the sooner you get started, the better. And that's it really from my side. Thanks again for attending. Thanks for your time. I hope you received all the information or most of the information that you needed. And then best of luck. And I guess we'll see or hear each other, read each other by email in the future. So again, thank you and goodbye.